Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Financial Juneteenth, and I wanted to talk for a second about this study that I just saw. It's on financialjuneteenth.com, and basically the study is revealing the fact that something that many of us already kind of know, which is that 78% of professional athletes face bankruptcy within a few years of the end of their career. I want to say 78% of NFL athletes face financial ruin. They say this is within 12 years of the time that they retire from the league. You might have heard me make some comments about the NFL and in terms of what I believe tends to happen to a lot of our brothers that get connected to professional sports. I almost see professional sports as this double-edged sword for the black man because, on one hand, we are so athletically gifted that it becomes very tempting for us to overinvest in sports because many of us, we run the fastest, we jump the highest, we're the strongest, and all these other things. But the problem is that it's a little bit like the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games was a scenario where you might have a bunch of people try out for the same spot and only one or two of them survive. And the other, if there's 30 people, the other 28, 29 of them end up deceased or end up losing everything, while there's one person that does succeed. And that person is paraded as a symbol of hope for all the impoverished people throughout the country. And so the analogy with professional sports is that for every one LeBron James, there are probably about 5,000 other guys who tried to become LeBron and failed. And in many of those cases, these guys lose everything just chasing this dream. But the LeBron dream is being promoted nationwide to young black boys as a symbol of hope, where they think that if I practice and I work hard, I can be just like LeBron. So, unfortunately, in many cases, they might invest everything. When you're tall and strong as a little kid, you have all your relatives and your friends saying, "Oh, you're gonna play football, you're gonna play basketball." You get to high school, if you're a star of the sport, nobody really asks you how you did on the math test, but everybody wants to know how you did in the game. Nobody wants to know about your academic interests, but everybody wants to talk to you about what you can do on the court or on the field. So many of us end up identifying ourselves based on our our athletic ability. And it's not to say that sports cannot be good for you. I learned a lot from sports. I played a lot of sports in school, always loved sports. Even as a kid, I lived by this fantasy that if I worked hard enough, I could be a professional football player or a professional basketball player. And it didn't take me long in college to realize that I was actually lucky that I didn't become a professional athlete because that is a difficult life. Now, let's talk a little bit more specifically about athletes going broke and what kind of happens. It doesn't mean that this happens to every athlete. I know a lot of athletes who are as intelligent as anybody. Shaquille O'Neal, guys like that, Jamal Mashburn, who are doing extremely well. But I know a lot of athletes who have died economically. They've died spiritually. Some of them have died even physically. Many of them have died intellectually. And a lot of this comes from the fact that there is a culture that surrounds black athleticism that sometimes is not as healthy as it should be. It doesn't mean everybody falls for this culture. It doesn't mean that all the stereotypes are true, but there is kind of a leaning, a cultural leaning, in which there's a lot of pressure to be a baller, to go to the club, throw your money in the air, or to drive a certain kind of car, live in a certain kind of house, wear certain kinds of clothes, throw money away in certain ways, so that you can show everybody how much of a baller you are, because money ain't a thing. Right, you have guys that like Allen Iverson, who used to talk about going to hotel rooms or going to new cities and literally buying a whole new wardrobe and then leaving the clothes in the city once he left to go to the next city. And I can understand that that's a temptation of a young guy. I think being 21, 22, 23 years old and having access to that much money is really too much for almost anybody. I mean, I have a PhD in finance. I've taught finance at the college level for 20 years. I know everything there is to know about money pretty much, but I can't say that I would have been mature enough to handle that kind of money at that age, even myself. So I know that if I can't handle that, I know a lot of these other guys with that pressure, the women and the groupies and everybody else. It's almost impossible. I won't say impossible. It's very, very difficult. Nothing's impossible. We know that. Now, let me talk about a couple of things that I think kind of happen to these young guys when they get in this situation. Number one, I think overconfidence is huge because I think athletes have to be incredibly confident to be able to go out here against some of the greatest physical specimens on earth and dominate them the way they do. I mean, there's nothing more admirable than that, or a few things more admirable than that, and they deserve to be commended for that. But the problem with that is that sometimes this overconfidence can spill over into everything you do, where you end up living life on the edge. You end up throwing away money today because you think you're going to get money tomorrow, and then it takes takes old age to kind of kick in for you to realize that you are vulnerable. Things are not always going to be perfect. You have to be prepared for a rainy day because things might go bad. And what's really sad to me is when I see a former great athlete who loses all of that, who, the lights go out, the money stops coming in, the women stop checking on him, life is just not good anymore. He's working as a security guard or something somewhere, and he's reflecting on all the things that he threw away, which I think can lead to other forms of depression, which can then translate into drug and alcohol addictions. And it's really sad to me. I mean, I think about Melvin Turpin, who killed himself. He played at the University of Kentucky. He was one of the Twin Towers back in the 80s. Everybody thought that Mel was going to go off and have this great career in the NBA, and he didn't. He ended up getting booted because I think he couldn't keep control of his weight. And so he ends up coming back to Kentucky and working minimum wage jobs, and I imagine he was probably embarrassed. And from what I understand, his education level was not that high. So he wasn't. It's not like he could fall back into other opportunities because somebody told him along the way that as long as you can dribble a basketball, you really don't need to learn how to read that well. That is a myth that's perpetuated for a lot of young black men, and the pressure. This is a lot of it's due to peer pressure. A lot of these kids, when they're 9, 10 years old, they're already being scouted by the AAU leagues and the local football coaches and everybody else. And I'm not dogging these people out for doing what they do, but I am telling parents, don't let your child get sucked into that nonsense. Because even if they win, sometimes they still lose. Even if they do get to be that one in a million who makes it to the NFL or the NBA, they can still end up bankrupt, which the stats show this. So the stats show that 78% of former NFL players end up bankrupt. They can still end up bankrupt, but they can also end up spiritually bankrupt, socially bankrupt, psychologically bankrupt, where you're talking about, say, a former NFL player who maybe has a brain disease because his head's been getting pounded over and over and over again. That's why you see all these former NFL players suing the league, because a lot of them can't think anymore. They get depressed easily. They can't sleep. They can't focus. They're seeing things. I've talked to a guy who was a former All-Pro NFL player. I mean, had a dream career. I mean, made the Pro Bowl. He won a Super Bowl, all these things, and he said, "Man, I can't take it. It's torture." And this guy wasn't old; he was maybe 40, in his early 40s. And so, I think that we have to think about the whole picture when you're talking about building a life. Everything that glitters is not gold. I think that we talked about the overconfidence issue. Another thing I can say that I've seen happen to a lot of athletes is the underinvestment in educational preparation to do a lot of things outside of your sport. I think that anybody who walks away from education to do really anything else is probably going to lose, because an uneducated person with a lot of money is eventually going to be broke, because educated people are going to come along and steal it. These guys that are getting rich out the NFL are the people that went to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and got these law degrees. The athletes are pretty much being used up, and many of them being chewed up and spit out, because as E40 said in his song a long time ago, they'll find a new nigga next year. And the fact is that every year when you're coming in there, they're cheering for you, they're telling you you're the greatest, they're telling you how much they love you. The bottom line is that they don't love you that much. They love you for the moment because you're the guy that's making them money right now. But in a couple of years, they might love somebody else. And I think that's very depressing, because sometimes when we fall in love, whether it's with a person or with an idea or with an opportunity, we think the love is more secure than it actually is. And it's devastating to lose that. Another thing is that catches up with athletes is the addiction to an excessive lifestyle. A lot of times when you start making money, and this applies to anybody who has money, whether you're an attorney or whatever, or a doctor or an athlete, there's an expectation that some people feel to dress a certain way, drive a certain kind of car, to live a certain kind of life, take everybody to dinner. You're the one that's balling. You're the one that pays for everything. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, because once your income kind of drops, you may not be able to afford that lifestyle that you had become addicted to before, or that you think that everyone expects you to live, or when people come to you for money, you expect to be able to say yes, or you feel guilty for saying no. A lot of athletes do go broke because they're so generous. So I think that this myth that all the athletes are just throwing their money away, I don't think that's true. I think I've seen a lot of guys go down because they can't say no to anybody. They don't want to say no to anybody, and I'll talk about that in a second. The other thing I've seen with athletes is the creation of a lot of very high fixed costs. You see, the thing is, if you create, say, child support payments to 7 babies mamas, and a big house note and a big car note for 2 or 3 cars that you don't really need, and a bunch of other fixed expenses. If your expenses, let's say your expenses get up to $30,000 a month. Well, that's cool if you're making, if you're making $200,000 a month, it's going to seem pretty easy to pay $30,000 a month. $200,000 a month ain't that much. That's like 2.4 million. So imagine if you're making, 12 million, say 6 times it. So you're making over $1 million a month. $30,000 a month don't seem like nothing. But $30,000 a month becomes unbearably high when you're no longer making professional athlete money. When you're living off that little pension they give you, if you get access to the pension. The NFL works very hard, I believe, to make sure you don't get access to the pension at some point. I'm not saying they do that deliberately, but what I will say is that their league is structured a certain way for a reason. It's structured for them to make the most, to make the profit, not you. So that $30,000 a month, that $360,000 a year in expenses can become frighteningly unbearable once you're no longer making professional athlete money. And if you are an athlete, let's say you don't have a lot of education, a lot of skill, a lot of alternative investments, well, that income drop can be huge. Boom, like a brick. So I think about guys like Lorenzen Wright, who used to be a great player to play for Memphis. He played at for the Grizzlies, and he eventually ended up getting killed. It had something to do with a drug deal or whatever. And the impression I got was that his expenses had gotten so high from marriage, from child support, from everything else, that he had to find a way to make that same level of money. Well, some guys turn to dealing dope in order to get by. I'm not saying that's what happened with him. I don't know every single detail, but I have seen a lot of cases where guys get really desperate to try to make those high expenses after it's over with. So my advice is keep it low. Keep the expenses low. No matter how much you make, you can live off of $10,000, $15,000 a month. Maybe 7 to 8,000 a month if you can. I mean, you don't have to. Or Shaquille O'Neal had a deal where the money he made from the Orlando Magic, he lived off that money for like the next 15, 20 years. Because you can go to the NBA, NFL, and spend a ton of money and still save and invest for your future. So if you're making $1 million a month, you don't have to spend $1 million a month. Or if you're making $500,000 a month, you don't have to spend half of that. You can spend, say, 5% of that, which is still a ton of money for you to have in your pocket. You can still ball. You can still go to the club and throw it up if you want to. But then, at the very least, you've got something that backs up your income so that when things get a little dry, when you get a little old, when your career comes to an end, if your team cuts you, if nobody wants you anymore, you're still going to be okay. You're going to be fine. The other thing is, I think that there is a pressure for athletes to save the world. When they go pro, they become successful. I think there's a lot of people that look to that person as an ATM machine. Some of that's natural. A human being has a hard time looking at another person that has a lot of money and not thinking about how much money they have, especially if the person looking at you needs money. So somebody who needs, say, $1,000 to pay their rent, and if you're their friend and you take them out to the club and you drop $2,000, and then you take them on vacation, you drop $10,000, they're gonna be thinking, man, my rent's only $1,000. Like, it shouldn't be hard for him to help me with my rent. So you help one person, then you help another person, another person. It's like $1,000 here, $2,000 there, $3,000 there. And you think it's no big deal, but eventually it all piles up, and then the expectations start to pile up. And I think it's good to help other people. I really do believe that your success is meant to help other people. So people who tell athletes to be stingy and not share with anybody and all that, I hate that. That drives me crazy. I don't think that that's the way any normal human being would want to live. Your job as a black man, especially, is to support and love and care for the people that hold it down for you, the people that got you to where you are today. Don't let anybody tell you different. But here's the deal. What you can do is you can just keep a lid on it. Keep a lid on it. What I do, for example, is, number one, here's one thing I don't do. I don't brag. I don't like to brag to family members and relatives about how much money I have. I don't show up stunting and flossing and trying to really pretend like I have a whole lot of money, because when you do that, you draw people who need that money, whether it's women or it's relatives or it's friends or whatever. So I don't do that. Number two, if people need help financially, I always offer something, but I may not give you everything you want. So you call me and you say, I need $500 to help pay for something. I say, look, I can't give you $500, but I can give you 100, or I can give you 150. And then at the same time, I'm thinking that's all I'm going to give you for the whole year. Don't come back to me in a month or two where you're getting evicted again and ask me for money again, because the second time I'm going to say no. Or I might say, look, I'll invest in you. I have this job over here where I need somebody to do some work for me. So you want $500? I'll give you $700, but you got to do this job for me, which is a win-win. I get an employee, you get your money, everybody's good. And if people aren't willing to work for what you offer to give to them, then that means that they don't care enough about getting what they need. So if they don't care about getting what they need enough to work for it, then you shouldn't care. If they're not willing to invest in themselves, then you shouldn't invest in them. And what I tell people straight up is, I don't do charity, I do investments. So if you come to me with a proposal, my kids, even if they tell me, they say, Dad, I need $1,000 to pay for this, I'll say, okay, you come up with 500, I'll come up with the rest. Or you come up with some of the money, I'll pay all the rest if you come and work for me, or whatever. You got to meet me halfway. I don't do welfare. I don't do charity, and I don't do it continuously because you can't. Charity and begging is not a sustained way to live your life. You can't survive long term of begging people for stuff. You can't do it. And I think that, by taking a philosophy where you'll invest in people, maybe even make loans to them, make loans, make very clear terms, write this on a piece of paper. I will pay you back $1,000 by April 3rd, whatever. And then what happens is if they don't pay you back on time, then you now have an excuse never to loan that person money again. My grandmother used to do that. She was perfect with her money, always had perfect credit, always had money in her bank account. When she died, everything with all her arrangements were made, all the way down to the color of the cardinal red dress she wore on the day of her funeral. And my grandmother always had a rule. She said, "Look, I'll make a loan to you, but if you don't pay me back, never asked me for money again." So there were people who borrowed money from my grandmother in 1989 who couldn't borrow money from her ever again until the day she died in 2013. So I think loans are a decent way to go. Sometimes modest loans. I think that investments are a good way to go. Investments and compromises. A little bit of charity is okay. If you can afford to let the money go, sometimes it's all right to do that every now and then to show you care. But at the same time, don't feel like you have to be an endless supply of money for everybody who needs it. You can't do that. That's not going to work. And then when your income starts to drop, when you start going through a financial distress, those same people that are begging for your money, that are taking all your cash away from you, will not be there for you when you need them. That's the hard part about being the person who supposedly has the most money. And I think even in my own life, there aren't that many people I can think of where I can call them and ask them to borrow money. But I can think of at least 100 people, it seems like, who've borrowed money from me, asked me for money, asked me for favors, whatever. It's difficult. Now, the other thing I would throw in here, and this is the last couple things I'll say, is I would recommend any young person going to the NBA or the NFL or whatever when it comes to money, get you an advisor that you trust. Not just an advisor, but somebody who can become a controller of your finances. A couple people that you really trust. Maybe make it two people so they can kind of keep an eye on each other, make sure nobody's ripping you off. Maybe one can be a relative like a mama or a father or an uncle. The other one can be an outside advisor who has the expertise to properly guide where this money needs to go, and give those people power. Tell them, like, look, I'm making $400,000 a month. I only want you to give me access to 75, but I don't want you to tell me what to do with that 75,000 a month. But the rest of that money, the other 400,000 I'm bringing home per month after taxes, or 300,000, I want you to put that in investments and hold that money back for me. So see, here's the thing. A lot of people think that financial health means that you have to go to one extreme or the other, either be really frugal or out of control. I think you can find a nice middle ground where you can still be out of control and frugal at the same time. I think that spending 50, 60, 70,000 a month is a lot of money to spend. But the key is you got to keep a lid on it. So I would get somebody who can manage my money and tell me what to do. I would also make sure that money is being invested in things that will allow your money to work for you. Some of it can be in interest-bearing accounts or investments in the stock market. Everybody should invest in the stock market. That's what rich people do. That's why the wealth gap in the United States has increased. It's because rich people are investing in the stock market. Middle class and poor people are not. They're investing in their homes and other things in some cases, but home values don't always go up. So everybody should be invested in the stock market, but also I believe that there should be substantial investment in all these in many of these small businesses in the black community. And it doesn't have to be huge. You can create, if you're wealthy and you're, say, a baller in the NBA, you can create a venture capital fund where you simply make $5,000 investments in small startup companies that may have the potential to become the next Facebook or the next Google or whatever. And what happens is you end up having 10 or 15 possibilities, 10 or 15 potential streams of revenue coming in, or some of them develop, and then suddenly, instead of getting all your money from one source, you're getting your money from 5 or 6 sources. That's how I built, some of the wealth that I have, is by just investing in several different things. Some things work out, some things don't, but at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, I got money coming from multiple sources. So if you cut off one source, I'm not going to be dead in the water. So that's all I really want to say. So if your child might be a professional athlete, make sure they hear this. If they're not going to be a professional athlete, make sure they hear this. Financial literacy is the key to your future. Financial empowerment is not just about money. It's not just about money. It's not just about money. It is about freedom. Freedom is something that has eluded black people for over 200 years, or almost 200 years, since slavery was abolished. It's not 200 years, but you get the point, like 160, whatever. And so when it comes down to it, part of the reason so many people can control us so easily is because we've become addicted to a commodity that we do not control. White folks control all the money. White folks have set up systems to oppress us. Therefore, we must pledge allegiance to those systems in order to get the thing that we need. And that is a horribly vulnerable place to be in. You will never have power if you're always begging. Always keep that in mind. Last thing I want to tell you, we have a new film coming out called Resurrecting Black Wall Street. It is about the Black Wall Street massacre that occurred in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's not just about the massacre itself. It's also about the principles that led to black people creating one of the most powerfully and economically prosperous communities in the entire world and all throughout history. And it's also about the angry white folks who went in and burned the houses down and killed the men and did the horrible things to the community too. But also it's also finally about taking those ideas that led to the creation of that community and saying, how can we apply that today? What were these people thinking? What made them great? So I hope you will do me the kind favor of supporting the documentary. The website is resurrectingblackwallstreet.com. That's resurrectingblackwallstreet.com. We are selling pre-orders at a 20% discount, and I would love you forever if you will come in there and just drop 20 bucks on it and just back us up, because we are using this money to hire black people. We don't just talk about it, as my daughter always said. She said we don't just talk about it, we be about it. So we be about it here at Your Black World in Financial Juneteenth. And that's it. I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins. Please take care. God bless. I am gone. Peace.